So tell me a little bit about, I mean, obviously when you've written stuff and it's been well received, you could come and talk to DC, or if you know some of the people, and say, oh, I'll pitch a book or whatever.
Yeah.
How did it turn into instead, hey, why don't you do a whole line and you write a few and you get some other people? Yeah, that's a big step.
Right, it happened pretty organically. You know, I had been talking to Shelley Bond for years about doing something in Vertigo, and we didn't know if that was going to be an original thing or was going to be Doom Patrol. There's a couple times where, you know, Shelley's really great at getting something moving fast. And she had done a really good job the other times we would try to do Doom Patrol, and she would start building teams, and she'd start getting scripts, and you know, it was the last time I tried to write Doom Patrol was a really rough time because the band had just broken up. I was going through a lot of emotional stuff. I didn't have time to write. I was dealing with so much stuff. I was writing a solo record, so it didn't work out, and that was on me. And then we kept talking, and then ended up at a convention in South America with Dan and Jim.
Like you do.
Yeah, and we ended up talking about what I was going to do with DC, and there was a Batman project there for a while that I was talking about, and always Doom Patrol kept coming up, you know, and they asked what I really wanted to do, and I said Doom Patrol. And then, you know, but we were trying to figure out where it would live, like it needed a home, because Vertigo had changed and become this really awesome creator place. So it felt strange to then go back to Vertigo and make them go back to a certain way of doing things, you know. So then Jim had suggested, because I had a few different ideas. So Jim was the one that first suggested, why don't you do an imprint? And then I went home, started thinking about it for a couple weeks, and I started looking up characters, and then I was like, yeah, I think an imprint's going to be really fun. You know, I'm a big fan of collectives and groups of people, kind of like-minded artists and creators doing similar things or having similar goals. You know, I was a big fan. I'm a big fan of the record labels and Sub Pop Records in the 90s, that kind of stuff, you know. So I wanted something that kind of felt like the Sub Pop of comics, you know.
It's interesting because way back when Vertigo first started, it was, here's Alan Moore, he's been doing Swamp Thing, and here's Grant Morrison, he's been doing Animal Man, and those books kind of, by virtue of their content, leapt out of the DC line. And I think you could draw some kind of basic similarities between what Young Animal is and that, but I'm sure that, like, when you're coming into this, what do you think is the quality or the idea that defines how these books are going to be their own thing, and why Young Animal is its own imprint in that way?
You know, that's an interesting question. I you know, what kind of defines them, I think, is it really celebrates the art of making comics, monthly comics. It celebrates this team effort, this collective group of people, like kind of almost like a hive mind, making really different comics, making kind of strange comics or weird comics, and all being mature readers right off the bat, not necessarily growing into mature readers books like what had happened with, you know, with the start of Vertigo and things like that. So these are kind of starting off that way.
So let's talk about a couple of the books. I was able to flip through the first issue of Doom Patrol with DC Books the other day, and obviously that book has a big history, not just the Grant version, but if you go back to the Arnold Drake series, it was the weirdo book of DC's line back in the 60s and that. But I feel like you're coming in and it seems like you're acknowledging a lot of that history, but you're starting with, okay, at least I'm going to have this one character who's going to be brand new that we're going to kind of pivot around. You know?
Yeah, and there's a few brand new characters in there that show up pretty quickly. But yeah, you're right. It really celebrates the legacy of Doom Patrol, and as much as I can fit in, I want to celebrate all the runs. You know? Right now, I've got stuff in there that nods to Grant, Rachel Pollack, and the original series. You know. And so, and even stuff that references Keith Giffen's run. It was the last run. And there's a couple of other runs I'm still catching up on, like our Cooties run and John Byrne. So there's a couple in there. And, you know, the Cooper Bird one. There was that as well. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff I want to kind of get in there. But I am completely taking it to a new place. Like, it doesn't necessarily feel like any of those writers' books.
It's so funny because you talk about record labels and that kind of influence. And Doom Patrol always felt like a subculture within the DC universe in some ways. You know, I mean, like, this is the kid standing outside the storefront for the punk rock show. Versus meant something else, you know. And the other book that I love, only by virtue of the name, is Kate Carson Has a Cybernetic Eye. I mean, that title, it seems like, is working to, I wouldn't say undercut, but it's like you definitely know that there's going to be a specific tone with this book when that's the kind of formal title you get.
I think so. You know, when I was looking through the DC Encyclopedia for characters for this imprint, you know, his name really, his entry is like only that big. It's like half an inch or something. And the name jumped out, and I was like, who's Cave Carson? And it didn't have much written about him. It was just like, he's a spelunker, and he's good at hand-to-hand combat, and he has a cybernetic eye. And that was it. And I was like, cool, that's what it's about. It's about the fact that there's no information on his eye.
Yeah.
And we're going to explore that. So, yeah, imagery, titles, they all kind of, you know, Mother Panic, for example, just started off kind of with a name.
Yeah.
And then from there, she was built. But yeah, you know, a lot of this stuff starts with title and image.
So I know that over the weekend you guys have announced that Tom Scioli is going to come in and do some backup stories and some of this. And as soon as I just saw the words Tom Scioli and superpowers, I was like, I know the exact series that he was reading when he was getting ready for that, because I have those Jack Kirby issues from when Twilight was coming out, and they are like eyeball melting comics.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, Tom Scioli is somebody I've been a fan of for a while. I got into him ever since I remember Godland, and then I had really got into Transformers G.I. Joe.
Yeah. And
then that led me to go back and get American Barbarian, things like that. And we started talking on social media. And then I knew I wanted him involved somehow, and we started talking, and I think he just said, what about superpowers? And then I was like, it's a no-brainer. It's like, you're going to tell some really crazy stories with this, you know?
Yeah. So how do you view your role overall? Obviously, you're helping recruit guys, you're helping put teams together, but on the books that you're not writing yourself, are you doing script notes? Are you doing just art direction stuff?
I'm doing both, you know? I'm doing kind of a little bit of everything. So I'm writing 2.5 of the books, and but basically I act as kind of like guidance, curator, a little bit of editing. I do go through the scripts and make notes. I do go through every stage and make notes, really.
Yeah.
Although, like, for the books that I'm not writing, I really do trust the teams, and I let them steer the ship. And if there's anything that I see in there that I'm like, hey, this could be a little bit better, you know, I'll give them notes.
So it's interesting. Maybe I should have started with this, but you started as a DC intern.
Yeah.
When did you?
The year I think was '99, because that's when I graduated SVA. So I was a cartooning illustration major, and one of my instructors was Joey Cavallari. And,
he's the best.
Yeah, I love Joey, and he got me a gig interning at DC Comics under him. So I did that for about 1.5 years, and then I did toy design until I started the band, and then the band took off, and then I had always wanted to come back to comics.
Yeah. So is it weird? I mean, is it a full circle thing knowing that you're now at DC and you're doing your own thing?
It's cool, yeah, it is. And I always love their company. You know, I feel like I was having a talk with Dan and Jim about this as we were discussing how far we can push this stuff, and I felt that DC Comics had a capacity for withstanding a little more push to them. Like, I felt that the comics in the 80s, and I love both Marvel and DC, but I felt like the comics in the 80s that were really pushing things psychologically were those DC books like Watchmen and Dark Knight and all that stuff that was coming out. Really got to the darkness, and it got into the psychology. I think DC characters are psychologically appealing. I think that's why Vertigo was even able to exist in the first place, because you had Karen Berger who had a vision, and these writers that had a vision, and they were able to take these characters places that superheroes hadn't gone before. And I don't think anybody else was doing that at the time besides DC.
Yeah.